In 1918, as soldiers returned from the blood-soaked trenches of World War I, they brought home something far deadlier than any weapon used on the battlefield: a virus that would kill more people in 24 months than the war had killed in 4 years. And the reason it killed so many wasn't just because the virus was deadly, but because governments, newspapers, and those in power deliberately spread misinformation that turned a medical crisis into a mass extinction event. They called it the Spanish flu, not because it started in Spain, but because Spain was neutral in the war, and their newspapers were the only ones honest enough to report on it. While America, Britain, France, and Germany censored every word about the pandemic to protect wartime morale, telling their citizens that everything was fine even as people were dying in the streets. The first wave hit in the spring of 1918. And it was relatively mild, so officials convinced themselves and the public that it was just a bad cold, nothing to worry about, and they told people to keep working, keep fighting, keep living normally because the war effort depended on it, and questioning this narrative was considered treason. Doctors who tried to sound the alarm were silenced, newspapers that attempted to report the truth were shut down, and any information about the virus's true lethality was classified as a threat to national security, so the public had no idea what was coming. When the second wave hit in the fall of 1918, it was like nothing humanity had ever seen. The virus had mutated into something catastrophic, and it didn't just kill the old and weak like most diseases, it targeted healthy young adults in their 20s and 30s, drowning them in their own bodily fluids as their immune systems went into overdrive and destroyed their lungs from the inside. People would feel fine in the morning, complain of a headache by noon, and be dead by sunset, their skin turning purple-blue from lack of oxygen, blood pouring from their noses and mouths, and there was nothing doctors could do except watch them die. But instead of telling people the truth, instead of implementing quarantines and closures and masks, officials doubled down on the lies, because admitting they'd been wrong would mean admitting they'd let thousands die unnecessarily. So they kept insisting it was just the flu, kept telling people that fear was the real enemy, kept promoting fake cures and snake oil remedies while suppressing the actual science that could have saved lives. Newspapers ran ads for miracle cures. Drink this tonic. Wear this amulet. Eat raw onions. Gargle with kerosene. Take this patent medicine filled with alcohol and cocaine. And desperate people bought them by the thousands because they had no other information to go on, no way to know that the very institutions they trusted were lying to them. In Philadelphia, the director of public health, Wilmer Cruzen, received urgent warnings from doctors that a massive outbreak was beginning and that a planned Liberty Loan parade with hundreds of thousands of people should be canceled immediately. But he ignored them because the parade was essential for selling war bonds, and he publicly declared that there was no cause for alarm, that the city was safe, that people should attend and show their patriotic support. On September 28, 1918, 200,000 people packed the streets of Philadelphia for that parade, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces, and within 72 hours, every single hospital bed in the city was occupied, with patients lying in hallways, on floors, in converted warehouses, gasping for air while nurses and doctors worked until they collapsed from exhaustion. Within a week, 4,500 people were dead, and within 6 weeks, over 12,000 had perished, and the city ran out of coffins, ran out of grave diggers, ran out of space to put the bodies, so corpses were stacked in warehouses, left in homes for days, piled on sidewalks waiting for collection, and the stench of death hung over the entire city like a fog. But Philadelphia wasn't unique. This same pattern repeated in city after city across America and around the world because officials everywhere made the same calculations, prioritized the same things, told the same lies, and people died in droves because they believed what they were told.
In Boston, authorities insisted that closing businesses and schools would cause more harm than the virus, so they kept everything open, and the hospitals overflowed with dying patients who were turned away because there was simply no room, no staff, no supplies left to treat them. In San Francisco, officials initially took the virus seriously and implemented a mandatory mask ordinance, but business owners complained that it was hurting profits.
And a group calling themselves the Anti-Mask League formed to protest what they called an infringement on their freedom, and they held rallies and spread propaganda claiming that masks were useless or even harmful, that the real danger was government overreach. And eventually the officials caved to the pressure and lifted the mandate, and immediately the death toll skyrocketed as the virus ripped through the unprotected population. The misinformation wasn't just spread by ignorant people, it was deliberately manufactured by those who had something to gain from keeping society running normally, by factory owners who needed workers, by politicians who needed votes, by newspaper editors who needed readers, by military leaders who needed soldiers, and they all colluded to suppress the truth and promote lies because acknowledging reality would have cost them power, money, and influence. They told people that wearing masks was a sign of weakness, that real Americans didn't hide from disease, that taking precautions meant you were a coward or a traitor, and they wrapped this deadly nonsense in the flag and called it patriotism. Religious leaders told their congregations that faith was better than medicine, that God would protect the righteous, and they kept holding packed services where the virus spread like wildfire through the pews, killing families, decimating communities. And when people died, those same leaders said it was God's will, rather than admitting they'd led their flocks to slaughter. The fake cures being promoted weren't just ineffective, many were actively harmful, with people drinking industrial alcohol, inhaling toxic fumes, taking medications that poisoned them, all because trusted authorities and advertisers told them these things would work. And when people died anyway, the con artists just moved on to the next product, the next lie, the next group of desperate victims. What made the misinformation so deadly was that it didn't just mislead people about one thing. It created an entire false reality where the virus wasn't that serious, where experts couldn't be trusted, where common sense precautions were attacks on freedom, where the real enemy was fear rather than the disease. And once people accepted that reality, once they built their identity around it, they couldn't back down without admitting they'd been fools. So they doubled down, tripled down, kept believing the lies even as their loved ones died around them. In some communities, people who wore masks were attacked, businesses that closed were vandalized, doctors who spoke the truth were threatened and driven out of town, because the misinformation had metastasized into something tribal, something that defined who you were and what side you were on, and changing your mind meant betraying your people. The virus didn't care about any of this, of course. It just kept spreading, kept mutating, kept killing. And by the time it finally burned itself out in 1920, it had infected 1/3 of the world's population and killed somewhere between 50 and 100 million people, more than died in World War I, more than died in any plague or pandemic in human history. And the vast majority of those deaths were preventable if people had just been told the truth. But they weren't told the truth. And the reason they weren't told the truth is because those in power made a calculation that their short-term interests, winning the war, maintaining the economy, keeping control, staying in power, were more important than the lives of millions of ordinary people. And they knew that if they told the truth, if they admitted how bad things really were, people might panic, might refuse to work, might question authority, might realize that their leaders had failed them, and that was unacceptable. So they lied, and they kept lying, and they punished anyone who tried to tell the truth. And millions died because of it, died alone in their homes, died in overcrowded hospitals, died believing the lies they'd been told, died thinking it was just bad luck or God's will, rather than the predictable consequence of a deliberate campaign of misinformation. The wealthy and powerful, of course, had access to better information, better health care, better protection. They knew the truth even as they lied to everyone else, and they made sure their families were safe while telling the working class to keep showing up, keep risking their lives, keep sacrificing for the greater good.
And when it was finally over, when the bodies were counted and the true scale of the catastrophe became impossible to hide, those same leaders didn't apologize, didn't take responsibility, didn't face any consequences for the lies they'd told and the deaths they'd caused. Instead, they moved on, rewrote the history, blamed the virus rather than their response to it, and made sure that the lessons of 1918 were forgotten as quickly as possible. The Spanish flu disappeared from history books, from public consciousness, from collective memory, because remembering it would mean remembering how badly we'd failed, how easily we'd been manipulated, how willingly we'd believed comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. And that's why it happened again, and again, and again. With HIV in the 1980s, when officials said it was just a gay disease and ignored it until it spread to everyone. With COVID-19 in 2020, when we watched the exact same patterns repeat, the censorship, the fake cures, the prioritization of economy over lives, the attacks on experts, the tribalization of basic health measures, the millions of preventable deaths. The misinformation that killed all those people in 1918 didn't die with them. It evolved, adapted, found new hosts, new platforms, new ways to spread, because there will always be people who profit from lies, who gain power from confusion, who benefit from keeping the public ignorant and divided. And as long as we keep falling for it, as long as we keep choosing comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, as long as we keep trusting the wrong voices and ignoring the right ones, the misinformation will keep killing, and the body count will keep rising, and we'll keep asking how it happened, how we let it happen, never quite willing to admit that we were warned, we knew better, we just didn't want to believe it.